For decades, Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link has worn a scarlet letter in gaming history, the black sheep of the Zelda franchise. Dismissed as barren, lifeless, a hollow shell compared to the vibrant world of the original Legend of Zelda. But what if everything players thought they knew about this world was completely wrong? What if Zelda 2's Hyrule wasn't empty at all, but alive in ways that modern gamers have completely forgotten how to recognize? The year is 1987. Nintendo releases The Adventure of Link in Japan, and players expecting another top-down adventure get something radically different. Side-scrolling towns with sparse NPCs, a vast overworld that seems empty at first glance, combat that feels punishing, unforgiving, almost cruel. The immediate reaction? Disappointment. Where were the bustling villages? Where was the dense, secret-filled world of the first game? This perception has hardened into gaming gospel. Even in 2026, nearly 40 years after release, Zelda 2 is frequently cited as the least engaging entry in the franchise. Forums overflow with comments calling the world dead, lifeless, a downgrade. Strategy guides and retrospectives often frame the game's world design as a noble experiment that simply didn't work. But here's the thing, this widely accepted criticism misses the entire point of what Nintendo was trying to achieve. To understand why Zelda 2's world might be more alive than anyone remembers, we need to completely redefine what alive actually means in game design. Is a world only alive when NPCs walk predetermined paths through crowded streets? Is it only engaging when every corner holds a treasure chest or secret? Or could there be another kind of vitality, one built on tension, consequence, and the player's own survival instincts? Let's start with the overworld itself, because this is where the misconceptions run deepest. When players first step onto the overworld map in Zelda 2, they see a tile-based grid stretching across the screen. Link appears as a small sprite navigating through forests, plains, graveyards, and swamps. Compared to the densely packed screens of the original Zelda, this seems sparse, almost minimalist. But that's exactly the point. The original Legend of Zelda presented Hyrule as a series of interconnected screens, each packed with enemies, secrets, and obstacles. It was a world designed for constant, immediate action. Every single screen had something happening. Zelda 2 takes the opposite approach. It gives players space to breathe, to plan, to feel the weight of distance. When Link needs to travel from the North Castle to the town of Hyrule, it's not a quick jaunt, it's a journey. The overworld creates genuine geographical scale that the first game, for all its brilliance, simply couldn't achieve with its screen-by-screen design. This sense of scale does something profound to the player's psychology. The distance between towns matters. The length of the journey from one palace to another creates real tension. Players can't just mindlessly wander, they need to think about their path, consider their resources, plan their route. This is world building through geography, making Hyrule feel vast and dangerous rather than compact and controlled. But here's where Zelda 2's genius truly reveals itself. The random encounters. Oh, those infamous random encounters that have frustrated players for decades. These aren't just annoying interruptions, they're the beating heart of the overworld's vitality. In the original Zelda, enemies were visible on screen. Players could see them coming, plan their approach, or avoid them entirely. Safe, predictable. Zelda 2 throws that security out the window. As Link traverses the overworld, shadowy creatures can emerge at any moment, pulling players into side-scrolling combat encounters. Moblins, Octoroks, Dairas, Goria, all lurking invisibly, waiting to strike. This system transforms every journey into a gauntlet of uncertainty. That peaceful-looking forest path, it could spawn 3 consecutive battles. The bridge connecting 2 regions, a potential death trap. Players can't let their guard down for a single second. The overworld isn't empty, it's pregnant with potential danger at every step. This creates a kind of environmental storytelling that's incredibly sophisticated for 1987. The world isn't alive because it's full of visible activity, it's alive because it's full of invisible threats. The random encounter system also introduces emergent gameplay that makes each player's experience unique. One player might cross the swamp without a single battle, another might face 5 encounters in the same stretch. This variability means no two journeys through Hyrule are identical. The world responds dynamically to player movement, creating personalized narratives of survival and struggle. And let's talk about those encounters themselves, because they're not just random battles, they're world-building opportunities. Each region of Hyrule has specific enemy types that make ecological sense. Forest areas spawn woodland creatures, desert regions feature sand-dwelling monsters, graveyards unleash undead horrors. This enemy distribution creates distinct biomes that feel lived in by their monstrous inhabitants. The world isn't empty, it's occupied by hostile forces that have clearly claimed different territories as their own. The encounter difficulty also scales with geographical progression. Early areas near the North Castle feature relatively manageable enemies, but venture into the western regions or the far eastern territories, the difficulty spikes dramatically. This creates a natural flow to exploration, guiding players through increasingly dangerous zones that reflect Link's growing power and the escalating stakes of his quest. The world structure itself tells a story of a hero's journey from novice to master. Now let's examine the towns, because this is where most critics claim Zelda 2 truly fails. The side-scrolling towns with their limited NPCs seem like a massive step backward from the original game's more interactive settlements. But this perception completely misses the functional brilliance of Zelda 2's urban design. In the original Legend of Zelda, NPCs existed primarily to dispense cryptic hints or sell items. They were atmospheric, sure, but largely decorative. Zelda 2 fundamentally reimagines what towns are for in an action RPG. Every town serves specific, crucial mechanical purposes that make them essential stops rather than optional diversions. Take the town of Hyrule, the first settlement players typically encounter. Here, Link can find villagers who restore his health, a vital service in a game with no healing potions. One house contains a wise woman who teaches Link the shield spell, his first magical ability. These aren't random NPCs spouting flavor text, they're functional components of the game's progression system. The town isn't alive because it's crowded, it's alive because it's necessary. This pattern repeats across Hyrule settlements. The town of Ruto contains NPCs who grant Link the jump spell, fundamentally changing how players navigate the world. Mido provides access to healing and the downward thrust technique, a game-changing combat skill. Naboru offers the fire spell. Darunia gives access to the reflect spell. Each town has a specific identity built around the services and knowledge it provides. This creates a functional ecosystem where players must engage with Hyrule's communities to progress. It's not about wandering through bustling streets for atmosphere, it's about establishing relationships with specific locations based on what they offer. Players don't just visit Mido because it's there, they visit Mido because they need healing, need to learn vital techniques, need to prepare for the challenges ahead. The scarcity of towns actually enhances this effect. The original Zelda scattered merchants and hint givers liberally across the landscape. Zelda 2 features fewer settlements, but each one feels like a genuine discovery. When players finally stumble upon Saria after crossing dangerous territories, it's not just another town, it's salvation, a safe harbor in a hostile world. The relief of finding civilization after battling through endless encounters creates emotional investment that dense town placement could never achieve. This scarcity also forces players to think strategically about when to return to town. Do you push forward to the next palace with your current health and magic, or do you backtrack to the last settlement for restoration, losing time but ensuring survival? These decisions give weight to geographical positioning and resource management. The world feels alive because player choices about navigating it have real consequences. The town layouts themselves tell stories through environmental design. Many towns feature houses that are locked or inaccessible, hinting at a population larger than the few NPCs players can interact with. Some buildings can only be entered after learning specific spells, creating a sense of progression and returning to familiar locations with new capabilities. The towns aren't static set pieces, they evolve in utility as Link's abilities expand. And then there's the most famous town secret of all, the hidden wise man in Kasuto who will only appear when Link possesses the cross. This kind of conditional NPC appearance creates layers of discovery that reward thorough exploration and careful attention to the game's systems. The world isn't simply handing players everything they need, it's testing their observation and persistence. The NPCs themselves, while limited in number, serve clear purposes that make every conversation meaningful. In modern games, players often skip through NPC dialogue because most of it is filler, atmospheric window dressing that doesn't impact gameplay. In Zelda 2, nearly every NPC offers something valuable: a spell, a technique, healing, crucial information about palace locations or game mechanics. This density of useful information makes players pay attention to every interaction, rather than mindlessly mashing through dialogue boxes. Some NPCs provide vital hints about game progression. The woman in Rudo who tells players about the trophy in the Maze Island Palace, the townsperson in Mido who hints at the location of the magic key. These aren't just random comments, they're essential intelligence that can save players hours of aimless wandering. The world communicates with players through its inhabitants, creating a network of knowledge that must be carefully assembled to succeed. There's also a fascinating subtext to the town design that speaks to post-apocalyptic themes. Hyrule in Zelda 2 is explicitly described as a kingdom in decline, suffering under Ganon's lingering curse. The sparse populations and isolated settlements aren't design failures, they're thematic choices. These towns are the last bastions of civilization in a world overrun by monsters. The emptiness between settlements isn't boring, it's narratively appropriate. It reinforces the sense that Link is fighting to save the remnants of a dying kingdom. This thematic coherence extends to the visual design of the towns themselves. The side-scrolling perspective allows players to see the architecture of buildings, the layout of streets, the physical structure of these communities in a way the top-down original never could. Houses have visible doors, windows, distinct designs. The towns feel architecturally realized, even if they're not densely populated. There's a tangible sense of place that comes from seeing settlements from a street-level perspective rather than an aerial view. Now we need to address the element of Zelda 2 that most powerfully brings its world to life: the difficulty. This is where modern sensibilities often clash most dramatically with the game's design philosophy. Contemporary open-world games generally balance challenge to ensure players always feel competent and capable. Zelda 2 does the opposite. It makes players feel constantly vulnerable, and that vulnerability makes every moment in the world feel vital and immediate. The combat system demands mastery. Enemies have diverse attack patterns, shield positions, and movement behaviors. The blue iron knuckle can only be hit by striking above or below its shield. The red foca bounces unpredictably and strikes from unexpected angles. Players can't button match their way through encounters. They need to study enemy behavior, time their strikes precisely, manage Link's magic for spells, and constantly adapt their tactics. This combat intensity makes every random encounter on the overworld meaningful. Players aren't just clicking through trash mobs to get to the next story beat, they're fighting for survival. Each battle could lead to death and significant setback. This transforms the entire world into a dangerous arena where every step carries weight. The world feels alive because it's actively trying to kill you. The live system compounds this tension. Unlike modern games with infinite retries and generous checkpointing, Zelda 2 operates on traditional arcade-style lives. Die too many times and it's game over, back to the North Castle with Link at level 1. This creates enormous stakes for every action. That decision to explore the cave off the beaten path, it could cost you hours of progress. The world doesn't just exist for players to casually tour, it demands respect, preparation, and skill. The magic and experience systems add layers of strategic depth that make the world feel interactive and responsive.
Link gains experience from defeated enemies, which can be spent to level up his attack, magic, or life stats. These choices shape how players interact with the world's challenges, creating personalized approaches to the same environments. Spells like Shield, Jump, Fairy, and Thunder aren't just abilities, they're tools that fundamentally change how players navigate Hyrule. The Jump spell opens new paths on the overworld. The Fairy spell allows access to previously unreachable areas in dungeons and towns. Thunder obliterates on-screen enemies during challenging encounters. The world isn't static, it's a puzzle that yields to player knowledge and resource management. The palace designs themselves contribute to this sense of a living, breathing challenge. Each of the 6 palaces has unique layouts, enemy compositions, and mechanical gimmicks. The Parapapa Palace introduces basic dungeon navigation. The Medoro Palace requires mastery of the downward thrust to progress. The Island Palace demands precise jumping and spell usage. Death Mountain's Great Palace stands as one of the most brutally difficult dungeons in franchise history.
These aren't generic dungeon templates. They're carefully crafted trials that test different aspects of player skill and knowledge. The placement of palaces across the overworld also creates a sense of geographical storytelling. The first 3 palaces are relatively accessible from the North Castle, forming a kind of training circuit. The latter 3 require extensive travel through dangerous territories, crossing multiple biomes and facing increasingly deadly encounters. The world's structure reflects the hero's journey from novice to champion. And here's a crucial point that often gets lost in discussions of Zelda 2. The game offers significant freedom in how players approach its challenges. While there's a recommended order to the palaces, players can attempt them in different sequences depending on their skill level and strategic thinking. This open-ended progression was revolutionary for 1987 and creates a sense of agency that makes the world feel responsive to player choices rather than rigidly scripted. This freedom extends to exploration itself. Players who venture off the main paths can discover hidden towns, secret caves with experience bags, and optional power-ups that make the journey easier. The magic container hidden in the cave northwest of the North Castle, the heart container in the forest near Nabooru, the extra life doll locations scattered across Hyrule. These secrets reward curiosity and risk-taking, making the world feel layered and full of possibilities rather than linear and predetermined. The death system introduces another fascinating layer of world engagement. When Link dies, his shadow appears on the overworld, and if Link gets another game over without defeating that shadow, he starts back at level 1. This creates a persistent consequence that follows players through the world. The shadow isn't just a mechanical punishment, it's a physical manifestation of failure that haunts the landscape until confronted. The world literally remembers player mistakes and forces them to rectify those errors. Let's also consider the sound design, because Zelda 2's audio contributes enormously to the feeling of a living world. The town theme is peaceful and melodic, creating clear sonic contrast with the tension of overworld travel and combat. The palace music shifts to ominous, challenging tones that emphasize danger and isolation. The battle encounter sound effect creates instant alertness and adrenaline. These audio cues make the world feel responsive and alive. Different spaces have different moods, different energy, different levels of threat. The overworld music itself deserves special mention. That iconic theme combines adventurous melody with an underlying sense of melancholy and danger. It's not triumphant hero music, it's the sound of a lone warrior crossing hostile territory. The music reinforces the emotional truth that the world isn't a playground, it's a battlefield. So what does it all add up to? What does this examination of Zelda 2's design philosophy reveal about the nature of living game worlds? The truth is that Alive has been fundamentally misunderstood when applied to the adventure of Link. Modern gaming tends to equate vitality with density. More NPCs, more dialogue, more ambient activity, more scripted events. Zelda 2 operates on a completely different principle. A world is alive when it resists the player, when it demands adaptation, when every moment carries consequence. The overworld is alive because it's dangerous, unpredictable, and vast. The random encounters aren't a flaw, they're a feature that makes every journey tense and unique. The towns are alive because they're functional, necessary, and emotionally significant as safe zones in a hostile landscape. The combat is alive because it's demanding, varied, and constantly testing player skill. The world as a whole is alive because it pushes back against the player, rather than simply existing to be consumed. This design philosophy has aged in fascinating ways. While initially dismissed as a failed experiment, Zelda 2's approach to world design has influenced countless games that followed. The Soulsborne series uses similar principles: sparse NPCs with crucial functions, punishing difficulty that makes every encounter meaningful, worlds that feel dangerous rather than welcoming. Roguelikes embrace randomized encounters and permanent consequences. Modern open-world games are increasingly incorporating survival elements that make environmental navigation challenging rather than trivial. The Adventure of Link was ahead of its time in recognizing that player engagement doesn't come from the world being full of stuff, it comes from the world being full of challenge. A crowded, safe, predictable world is ultimately less memorable than a sparse, dangerous, unpredictable one. Players remember the journey across Zelda 2's Hyrule precisely because it was difficult, because towns felt like hard-won sanctuaries, because every palace required genuine skill to conquer.
There is also something to be said for the purity of Zelda 2's approach. Modern games often pad their worlds with collectibles, side quests, and activities that exist primarily to extend playtime, rather than enhance the experience. Zelda 2 wastes nothing. Every town has purpose, every spell has utility, every palace tests specific skills. The world is lean, focused, and intentional. This creates a sense of craftsmanship and respect for the player's time that's increasingly rare in an era of 100-hour open-world checklists. The game's influence on the franchise itself is often overlooked. While Zelda 2's specific mechanics didn't become series staples, its willingness to experiment and take risks set a precedent that allowed later games to innovate. Would Breath of the Wild's radical departure from formula have been possible without Zelda 2 proving the series could survive dramatic reinvention? Would Majora's Mask's dark, focused approach have existed without the precedent of a Zelda game that prioritized challenge and atmosphere over accessibility? The Adventure of Link also introduced elements that did become franchise cornerstones. The magic meter first appeared in Zelda 2 and became a standard feature in future entries. The town of Kasuto and other settlements established the tradition of named locations that would be referenced and revisited throughout the series. The concept of Link leveling up and gaining new abilities through progression influenced the RPG elements in later games. Dark Link, one of the most iconic encounters in Zelda history, made his first appearance in Zelda 2's Great Palace. Even the difficulty philosophy has echoes in later titles. The brutally challenging hero mode options in modern Zelda games? That's Zelda 2's DNA. The Master Quest dungeons, the Trial of the Sword in Breath of the Wild, these are spiritual successors to the Adventure of Link's uncompromising approach to player challenge. The game established that Zelda could be genuinely difficult, not just puzzle-focused, and that philosophy continues to resonate with hardcore fans. So, was Zelda 2's world more alive than players remember? Absolutely, but not in the way most modern gamers expect or recognize. It was alive in its danger, in its scale, in its meaningful scarcity, in its demand for player mastery. It was alive because it made players feel vulnerable and made their victories feel earned. It was alive because it created emotional investment through challenge rather than spectacle. The widespread dismissal of Zelda 2 as lifeless or empty reveals more about changing gaming priorities than about the game's actual quality. Contemporary players often want worlds that make them feel powerful, safe, and constantly rewarded. Zelda 2 offers the opposite, a world that makes players feel small, threatened, and forced to earn every inch of progress. That's not a failure of design, it's a different philosophy of what games can be. For players willing to meet the Adventure of Link on its own terms, the rewards are substantial. the satisfaction of mastering its combat system, the relief of finding a town after a harrowing journey, the triumph of conquering a palace that seemed impossible, the sense of geographical mastery that comes from learning the overworld's dangers and opportunities. These experiences create memories that persist decades after completion because they were genuinely challenging to achieve. The game's reputation may never fully recover from 40 years of being called the Black Sheep, the Weird One, the least essential Zelda. But for those who look past the surface criticisms and engage with what the adventure of Link actually offers, there's a world of depth, challenge, and vitality waiting to be discovered. A world that was alive all along, just in ways that required players to slow down, pay attention, and embrace difficulty as a feature rather than a flaw. Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link isn't lifeless. It's not empty. It's not a failed experiment. It's a masterclass in how challenge, scarcity, and consequence can create world vitality that doesn't rely on density or spectacle. It's a bold, uncompromising vision of what a Zelda game could be, and 40 years later, that vision still has the power to surprise, challenge, and engage players brave enough to step into its dangerous, beautiful, unforgettable Hyrule. The next time someone claims Zelda 2's world is dead, ask them this: have they actually experienced the tension of crossing Death Mountain with low health? Have they felt the relief of finding Darunia after miles of brutal encounters? Have they mastered the combat system enough to appreciate its depth? Because a world that creates those kinds of emotional responses, that demands that level of engagement, that leaves that kind of lasting impression, that's not a dead world. That's a world more alive than most modern open-world games could ever hope to be.